Hello and welcome to another Infinity the Game battle report. In this game, we're playing Combined Army versus Bakunin in ITS Season 13 Frontline. The list that I played is on screen now, and it's a slight modernization of the Combined Army list that I ran to good effect during the ITS 12 online TTS team event, Human Edge. That was a 5-person aside team event where I played this list paired with an avatar list. I played this list exclusively in all 5 rounds, and it performed really well. I went all majors across 5 games. Now, this version of the list I've updated very slightly to incorporate a few lessons learned about combat groups, and I've also included a motorized bounty hunter. So if we look at the list on screen, you can see Combat Group 1 consists primarily of a large order pool full of short-ish range elements. So it has an Umbra Samaritan hacker with plasma carbine, good close combat skills, super jump, etc., and the Trinity upgrade to its hacking device. The Charonted Lieutenant hacker profile, which is actually the cheapest Charonted despite having an exceptional hacking suite and hacking device plus with +1 damage on all programs and whip 16, as well as being a heavy infantry with ballistic skill 14, good stats, no wounding cap, and a plasma rifle. It has the ubiquitous Libertos, 3 Datarazi, which is pretty high count, but you can afford them and accommodate them in this list. Bit and Kiss, a T-drone missile launcher, and then an R-drone and an Imatron for 9 regular, 1 irregular, and of course Lieutenant Order in that group. And then Group 2 is the cheapest Raicho profile with its multi-HMG and heavy rocket launcher. A Taiga with DACW, the motorized bounty hunter with submachine gun and chain colt +1 burst, and then an R-drone and an Imatron. So some features of this list that are very useful. Yes, you have a hacker and hackable lieutenant, but they are extremely tough. And if you do suffer the curse of an Oblivion lieutenant on top of 1, the list is full of veterans. The Datarazi are all veterans, the Raicho is a veteran, and the Imatrons are all veterans, which means you have 6 veterans, I want to say, in the list. 2 Imatrons, Raicho, and 3 Datarazi. Yep, you have six veterans in the list just out the gate. So it's very easy to play through a turn of Loss of Lieutenant, even if you never have a chance to trigger Memnonica because something happens to the Charonte that isolates it. Otherwise, this list showcases a concept that I like to play with, which is the idea of the artillery/fire support tag, where it's in Combat Group 2 with a relatively small order pool, but just enough to do some work from the deployment zone without moving it forward. It exists to provide covering fire to more aggressive pieces in Combat Group 1 who need orders to move forward, but play much better at close ranges. Ultimately, most tags have got they operate best in the heavy machine gun range band, some in the Spitfire range bands. So I prefer not to use tags as close assault pieces unless I don't have another choice. And this list kind of showcases it. And in this game, we'll see both some strengths and some weaknesses of that approach. The list is also good but not great at doing classifieds, mostly thanks to a huge number of hackers with high willpower, Whip 14, Whip 16, and the Umbra being a mobile troop that you like moving around with Whip 14, who is also elite and a hacker. So the Umbra can do many classifieds by itself. However, it's not necessarily a classified-centric list. It does not have, it only has one model that has D-charges, and that's the Raicho Pilot. It does not have an engineer, it does not have a doctor, it does not have an MSV, so the full sort of suite coverage that you might like doesn't exist, but it can do some classifieds very easily, and of course it loves doing Predator, etc. How I changed this list to incorporate the Bounty Hunter, previously the Taiga only had an A-piece plus shock CCW, and I had an Icadron. The Icadron can be exchanged for the cheapest Bounty Hunter profile, which gives you 1 spare point that makes the Taiga able to upgrade to a DACW, which actually is really nice. If you're berserking with the Taiga, you really want it to succeed. The Bounty Hunter I am least sure of, but it's a fairly good warband piece that slots kind of nicely into the second combat group, and it has, they're good in, like, they've received some buffs for its 8 points. It has mimetism, it can be impetuous but doesn't have to be, and on that profile it will often just roll up something reasonably useful out of its booty skill. So I felt like it was worth speculating on trying that out. I do miss having access to, in particular, baggage in this list, because Bit and Kiss sometimes really want to reload. Overall, though, I'm pretty happy with how the list performed, and we'll proceed on into the rundown. So this is the table that we played on. This is kind of on my kitchen bench, so you'll see a sink and some flower pots in the background. My partner does things with succulents. This is the table. So this is a fairly standard table built out of a combination of the cardboard Kaldstrom scenery that is available from Corvus Belli. This is, I want to say, less than 5 or less than 4 sets. but I've supplemented it with, in addition to the expansion scenery, you can see the bridges and the stairs. There's also that objective room, and then there are some other elements that add a little bit of elevation. And this I think really helps contribute to this table. So what we actually have is, you can see here, there's a big elevated platform on which the objective room, which we're just playing as an infinitely tall building with open medium and small access points, is placed, and then there are access ramps down and onto and off of that. I like one of the weaknesses of just using the Kallstrom terrain, apart from the fact that it does look quite samey, is that you don't have any real elevation changes, and Infinity really likes elevation changes in terms of playability. So this is just a big platform that's about tall enough for a Silhouette 6 or 7 miniature to bounce onto and off of, and we just sort of like put it on a table side there. It's actually there's a channel up past it, up the flank. It's great to put some buildings on, and it gives just like sort of like a secondary bit of elevation that models can hide behind, move onto, play around, etc. Also, you can see showcased here a little bit something I mentioned in the last video, which is, if you look closely, a lot of the buildings, almost all of the buildings, are placed in a way where they encourage movement into the midfield. Not exclusively, but for example, you can see this building here. If you want to leave it, the path takes you onto the board. The same with this building here, which will take you onto the board. Likewise this one, if you want to leave this building, onto the board. This one has pathways on both ways, but you can vault up, down, and over there. So the idea is, I really wanted to make sure that when I set this table up, it was very playable in that respect. So we're playing Frontline. Frontline is a scenario where you have to, there are 4 classifieds, but you can choose to have one of them be Intelcom, and otherwise all of the points are earned by dominating zones up and down the board. So you've got, it's a terrible series of lines, but basically you divide the middle of the board between the deployment zones into 3 zones. If you dominate the one furthest from your deployment zone at the end of the game, that's worth 3, middle one is worth 2, closest one is worth 1. So there are 6 points up for grabs dominating zones, with the big money from grabbing the one closest to your opponent's objective deployment zone, and then otherwise 4 classifieds. Something that was very interesting about how this scenario has changed, and something I've been talking to locals about, is, does that make this a classified scenario? And I think the answer is no, but you can absolutely still play it like you would have with the old Frontline, where you can kind of just play it like it's annihilation until the last turn and then scramble for position. Or if you're going second, you can aggressively hide until it's the last turn and then move to dominate quadrants based on more efficiently allocating points. But I think if the game is close, those classifieds will become important. I don't think it's a scenario that you bring a list that you would, say, build for highly classified to, even though there's only one more classified in highly classified than there is in Frontline. And the reason for that is, okay, obviously secure the HVT can account for 1. But then also, if one of your classifieds you just can't do, or 2 of your classifieds even you just can't do, you can make one of them secure the HVT, and whichever one of them is worth the most points, you can turn into an Intelcom. And that happened in this game. After my opponent and I, before rolling for table edges and initiative, we drew our classifieds, and each of us actually opted to have one of those 4 classifieds as Intelcom. Which I thought was really interesting. It's a really interesting change. You would kind of pretty rarely, or I would rarely choose Intelcom in the previous version of this scenario, because I felt like the point was easier to score and more important. At worst, you could always secure the HVT, and it would sometimes make the difference between a major and a minor. But in this case, both of us had one of those 4 classifieds that we couldn't do easily, so we just chose to use Intelcom. So that's something to really think about in this scenario. And speaking of classifieds, these are the ones that I drew. So I drew Predator, so these are obviously draw 2, pick 1, draw 2, pick 1, etc. I drew Predator, which I love. I can do that classified by accident with this list. You're actively incentivized to kill things in close combat with the Umbra and with the Tega creature and with the Adarazi. Excellent. Best classified that you can draw, and it can also be worth an extra bonus point. I drew Mapping, which is not ideal, but I can definitely do it. The reason why it's not ideal is that you have to get to the enemy deployment zone, which kind of sucks, although at least in this scenario, you want to be pushing things forward anyway. I drew Nano Espionage, which I cannot do, and which I chose to turn into a 12-point Intelcom. And then I do Net Undermine, which is also a really good one. It's very easy to accomplish. You just have to get over the center line and make a whip roll. It is worth noting that the only troops that I have that can reliably do it are Bit, who is a character, and Kiss, same reason, and the Umbra Samaritan, but especially the Umbra Samaritan kind of wants to make it past the midline. So I was very happy to draw Net Undermine as well. So these are 3 good classifieds and 1 intel com, and if I don't do all 3 of my classifieds, I can secure the HV tip. So fantastic. I think the card that I drew for Nano Espionage to pair with was the Multispectral Visor or Sensor one, which I don't have any of those either, so I picked whichever of the 2 had the most points. So I could use it as intel com. So we rolled for Lieutenant, and I lost the roll. Whip 16, I think I just hard flubbed it. I rolled a 1, and my opponent won. And this being Frontline, they chose Deployment and to deploy second. So I actually was pretty happy to snap pick first. I might even have chosen to go first anyway. 1, because my opponent is quite good, a very good Bakunin player who's been featured in a few battle reports on this channel previously. But 2, Frontline is a scenario, despite having end-of-game scoring, that I'm pretty comfortable going first in. And the reason why is that it's not a scenario where scoring happens turn by turn by turn. It's a scenario where scoring happens at the end of the game. And if I think I have a good chance to alpha, or if I think I am best served by alphaing, or even if I just think the table is conducive to it, which I didn't actually in this particular case, but mostly this was just a gesture of respect to my opponent. I didn't want to give them first turn. I didn't want to give them a charge at me. They're a very experienced Bakunin player, so I always decided I didn't want to have any of that, and that I would go first. And I would have to, therefore, that put the impetus on me to do enough damage to secure victory over the first few turns, basically first couple of turns, such that my ideal state is that we roll into the final turn and my opponent is as close to retreat as possible, and I am sitting in quadrants without them having any recourse. So we will see how that went. So I've deployed, you can see a picture of my deployment from my perspective here. And I've deployed relatively conservatively. This is before the right show has positioned. So kind of the watchword here is that every piece is deployed in a position where if it never moves, that's fine. Or if it doesn't move for the first turn, that's fine. And that's a good rule of thumb. You never know, particularly in vanilla, when you have so many options, because there's no link team, right? There's no Haris, link, duo, etc. You're not guaranteed that you will be moving out with one piece. And so because of that, you want to position in a way where if a piece doesn't move, because you might not move it, it's in a fine position come reactive turn. So I've hunkered down behind high ground. My opponent picked his deployment zone, by the way, because it was the one that had access to the high ground. So if we, let's have a quick look. Yeah, so if we look at this building here, this building here is in his deployment zone, so I gave him access to a high ground location. There are none of those in my deployment zone. So my deployment line is kind of along here, which means that this building, this 2-story high ground, is not in my deployment zone. But he had this tall building here, and he had this bridge here, which had a very nice lines of fire, kind of down like that. This building could see kind of down like that. I was reasonably happy with the deployment zone that I had because this objective room offered a nice shadow. But yeah, I respect his choice for deployment here. And mostly he wanted to deploy second and probably go second. So I've deployed, we've got my, on this flank, we've got my motorized bounty hunter, my Chirontid, a couple of Datarazi. On this right flank, we've got the Umbra Samaritan, a Tega, another Datarazi, and we'll zoom in on those in a second. But then, so probably the most important is that Bit and Kiss have gone down in the center. So you can see Bit's deployable repeater and Kiss. I had originally, actually, this is one of the things I changed before I locked my deployment in. I originally had them over here in this kind of a space. And that would be fine, except that they are my only source of pitches. And I want to be able to offensively hack with this list sometimes. So I changed where they were positioned and I put them much more centrally so that if I had to be active with them on the first turn, they had an easy path towards a number of different locations on the board. I wanted them to be able to get pitches down. And that ended up, that decision, that change before I finalized my deployment ended up being super important. So here you can see a little bit closer on, this is my right flank. We've got our drone Datarazi. This is just useful chaff. It's positioned in a way where I am hoping that I will be able to launch an attack run up here, but I'm not guaranteeing anything. Over here, we've got the Libertos. Because it's not a dash-out sectoral, the Libertos is always made obvious by the fact that it has no mimetism. It's just deployed on those stairs. Nice good cover position. The mine's just in the open, blocking those 2 approaches. And then we can see Bit and Kiss in the middle here. And then here again is my right flank with the Chirontid. Now it's worth noting the Chirontid is silhouette 5, so it can't vault up onto this. It'll have to take the stairs. I may have actually misplayed that on the first turn. Forgot it was silhouette 5, not 6. But it's ready in position to do that. It's facing against the wall, but that's so that it can see both of these angles, which is fine. There's an R drone here. I've tried to have as good repeater coverage of my deployment zone as possible. Again, that's setting up for reactive turn on my next turn. And then here we have my motorized bounty hunter proxy, which is a Tager swarm. It's 3 Tagers on a large base, and I'm actually just super happy with that as an idea. So I will be playing the motorized bounty hunter again, literally just so I can play that little Tager swarm. Just on repeater coverage, actually, if we move back to here, this is sort of worth discussing. So I am going to have to defend eventually. It won't be my first turn forever. And in that case, you want as good repeater coverage as possible. So if we look at my deployment zone, we have an R drone here, a deployed repeater with mine layer here, and an R drone here. This presents a lot of repeater coverage of my deployment zone. That's, again, super awkward sort of visualization there with my left-hand typing, left-hand mouse drawing there, but you can basically see it's not a completely airtight repeater coverage. Someone coming in off of this deployment zone would only have the Umbra hacker, for example, to ARO, but it does mean that, like, if a tag or a heavy infantry comes up this flank, or up this line, or even around this line, or up this line, they are contested by, and if the hacker does the same, right, to come after me, they are contested by my repeaters. So that was my deployment with a Raicho in reserve. When we come to my opponent, so they've deployed in Hardcastle. They eventually decided to use that bridge that I mentioned to host the Riot Girl, and there is some very good positioning on display here, by the way. So all of this is prone except for the Riot Girl herself, who is standing. This will be a core link. We've got a prone moderator here who rolled climbing plus, prone Morlock. We've got, this is, I think, a pair of moderators, a moderator paramedic, and it might be a moderator hacker, but it's basically 4 moderators, one of which is a paramedic, and at least 2 of which are normals. And then the Riot Girl, he's deployed this really well. So there are very few targets here that I can drop a guided missile onto and hit multiple things. So if I hit this, if I guided missile that moderator, then it will probably hit this moderator and this Morlock. But that's just about the only target. A missile launcher on this moderator won't hit anything else because the blast doesn't propagate downward from the stairs. And for every other moderator, they're in total cover relative to the blast focus of a missile template. And especially the Riot Girl, who is the target that I'm most likely to be going after if I choose to use missiles, is a long way away from anything that might possibly hurt her. The Morlock, I obviously expected to dismount the stairs like that, but as it happened, it rolled up climbing plus, which means that if it ever impetuouses, it can just go straight for my deployment zone. His reserve drop was this lizard, but here you can see the center of his line. So there is a duo here of Avicienna and a Riot Girl Spitfire. Really nice lean duo. It's a specialist, a very good specialist, and a very good doctor backing up a very serviceable gunfighter. And there's just no fat there. You don't need an extra troop in that. You don't need a superfluous 3rd Riot Girl to get +1 burst. Limit your vulnerability. It's a really nice combo. There's also another Morlock who rolled up no wound incapacitation, and then there is a Flash Pulse remote and a War Correspondent, both on Overwatch. And if we go over to his left flank, we can see again there's that Haris. This photo was taken before the tag got dropped down. And then here's another Flash Pulse remote, again on long Overwatch. Now, this is kind of a lesson that he learned from his last game in which I would just want to take with some nuance. There are times when it is really good to place Flash Pulse remotes or War Correspondents on Overwatch. But you have to think carefully about when you do it. It's basically, the question is, are you facing overwhelming firepower superiority? Are you going to be facing, for example, a sectoral with an MSV sniper in a link? Those are popular pieces now. If you do that, you have given up every one of those flash pulses for free. They will just die in 1, 2, 3 orders at most. At which point you've just given away free money. It is always good value to spend 1 order and get 1 kill out of your opponent's order pool. If you don't think you're facing that, and you do think that the flash pulses actually will meaningfully delay your opponent, then having like picket flash pulses watching short ranges, or flash pulses well back watching long ranges is really good. And actually, if we look at this one here, we can see how both of this war correspondent and this flash pulse are on top of a building that is well at the back of my opponent's deployment zone, which means that they are angling for that longer than 32-inch range face-to-face roll. Now, as it would happen, these pieces would actually hold quite well for the first turn, because of a decision my opponent made, which we'll get to, but they would eventually die. And I do wonder if it was right to put all of these pieces on Overwatch. Worked really well against Ariadna with only Spitfire range banner weapons, no real Rampart sweeper, but as we know, I'm about to deploy a tag. So just something to consider. Was that the right play? Maybe, maybe not. It certainly held me during the first turn, but it didn't stop me from doing what I wanted to do. So just as a recap, we're back here with my deployment zone. Oh, you can also see my HVT up here, and we're about to head into my first turn. Now, my opponent, this is part of where the decision to deploy a right show. Oh, sorry, speaking of, my right show deployed here, basically in this spot here. It was tall enough to vault up onto this this platform, and I wanted it to go in a position where it could engage things without being flash pulsed immediately, and could potentially engage the right girl missile launcher. And I thought if I put it down there, that I actually would have the option of moving up this platform, up here, and then peeking out to engage the right girl inside 24 inches, which was kind of ideal. Puts her on 13s, me on 14s. Didn't end up having to do that, but it was an option I wanted to keep open. Now, my opponent chose to strip orders from my second combat group, which meant that at the beginning of the turn, the right show only had access to its regular order, its tactical awareness order, and then the other irregular orders in the combat group that it could potentially convert. So it effectively had access to 4 orders if it needed them, down from the 6 that might have been in that pool. That's an interesting play, and it potentially hobbles my strongest Rampart sweeper, but it also leaves my main combat group, which is greedy for orders, totally unaffected. Nevertheless, that made me face an interesting choice on the first turn, right? In the absence of any other information, I would kind of assume him strip orders from the first combat group. That's usually what happens, not for a bad reason, which means that I was kind of expecting to just use my right show and spend those 6 orders, or like 5 or 4 of those 6 orders, just engaging and suppressing his riot girl, and then engaging some flash pulse remotes, and then maybe taking a face-to-face roll with the lizard. That was kind of what I expected to do, but with the change in my order pools, my plan had to change. So now that I've got 10 order pools in the main combat group, I can choose to execute a more order-hungry strategy. I don't have long-range pieces in that group, but I do have plenty of ways to close the distance. I think I take 1 Datarazi Impetuous, or 2. I certainly do not Impetuous with this Datarazi here, because it would run up like that and die to a missile. But just very non-committal. I think this Datarazi gets here and throws some smoke, and then the Taiga moves up into the smoke. It's just free movement. It's free real estate. You just take it. But then what we do is we set up for Bit and Kiss. So Bit and Kiss are going to be the heroes. Particularly Kiss is going to be the hero of this first turn. So Bit uses Cyber Mask. This is the profile of Bit that can do that. And they begin advancing up the field. My goal is to get repeaters down. So Cyber Mask means that basically they are going to be immune for an order, even if my opponent discovers them. They won't be revealed till the end of the order. So Bit, for her movement, she comes up this ladder here, and Kiss comes around there. There are a series of discover rolls made. Bit just drops prone, and Kiss moves up to here. And if we move to the next slide, we will see that's where Kiss got to. So Kiss ended his first, this is 2 orders deep in the turn, Cyber Mask, move, and Kiss has gotten to here. Bit is prone and doesn't want to die. Kiss has been revealed. I don't expect it to live, but as a matter of good practice, it activates, it drops prone, and it moves 2 inches. My opponent does something really clever at this point. He declares dodge with the right show, shoot with the right girl missile. And it doesn't actually occur to me why that is clever until the order is resolved, but we will see why. Now, Kiss is in good range, and he shoots 1 repeater down here, and 1 repeater down here. He needs 13s, totally serviceable. He ends up rolling one of them, and he hits this one on the stairs. The reason why I split burst, by the way, is that if you hit both, you may as well get 2 repeaters down. Always have them far enough apart that you're not wasting a shot if you don't get both. If you hit both of them by good luck. As it happens, I hit one of them. 2 dozen 13s. Yep, pretty realistic. So there's a repeater that comes down here. After that happens, my opponent gets to do his dodge movement, and he uses that dodge movement to get away from the repeater. So he gets this. This is still a risky move, right? Because how it's gone down, he actually has to break cover to get out of the repeater network. But he gets out of the repeater area with the dodge movement, which is super smart. Because I have a whip 16 +1 damage Charonted who has like 8 orders and a lieutenant order left to spend. It is very realistic that I possess him in a single order and then go on a rampage. So this is smart. The Riot Girl takes 2 shots, hits one of them, she wipes Kiss out, Kiss dies, but the repeater is down. And we can see that here. This is the top-down view, so the lizard has dodged. Kyle, my opponent, can't measure zone of control of the lizard, but he can kind of eyeball this, and he pretty much just goes 2 inches as far away as possible. And that's a sensible thing to do. Now, as it happened, it ended up being like this was 8 inches. So there was no way for him to hug, cover, and move this direction. This movement was the best that he could do, but it got him out of the repeater network. The Riot Girl, she'd taken her shot, and she ended up here in that range. So at this point, I begin to move my Charonted forward. I have Lieutenant Order. I think I actually just vaulted that. I vaulted that parapet, but let's pretend that I just took the stairs because that was the correct play. I just forgot that it was Silhouette 5, not Silhouette 6, like the anathematic. And my opponent, I declare attacking attack. I declare Spotlight, and my opponent declares Dodge, seeking to get out of the repeater network. Now, what actually ends up happening here is me being too clever and wanting to use my guided missile launcher. It is actually the wrong play in most respects. So how this ends up going down is that the Charonted moves up into the objective room. While it's going, it successfully spotlights the Riot Girl. It has to walk through a gap and take a 36-inch shot from a flash pulse remote, which luckily misses, needing 7s, to get up into position in that objective room. And at that point, I've got a spare order, so I actually Oblivion the Riot Girl as well. That succeeds. Again, burst 2, whip 16, Riot Girl is resetting on 13s. It's actually a great face-to-face roll for the Charonted. Damage is 17 because of the Charonted, and it's against half BTS. I end up making missile strikes against the Riot Girl, and I do actually kill her because the Oblivion breaks her out of the link. So she's only dodging on 13s, not 16s, and it takes basically 2 missiles to bring her down. But all of that was kind of a stupid roundabout way of actually getting a kill. All I actually needed to do was, as the first hacking attempt against the Riot Girl, Oblivion her. As soon as I succeed that, she's broken under the link. As soon as she's broken under the link, I can actually just move the Charonted through the objective room, and hey, spotlight her as you go, may as well, and come around the corner and engage her. That engagement from the objective room would have been and I was comfortable eyeballing this, would have been at about 15 inches. Which means that the Riot Girl is rolling 1 dice on 10s to my 3 dice on either 14s or 17s with a plasma rifle. That is a better face-to-face roll than going through all that rigmarole for the missile launcher strikes. It would have accomplished the same thing in fewer orders. At worst, there was a camouflage marker hanging out kind of near that space, which in the end actually turned out to be a 0 hacker. But I should have, if nothing else, I should have Oblivion first. Heavy infantry, particularly the classic single heavy infantry in a core link of regular infantry on Overwatch duty, are undone incredibly easily by Oblivion. It breaks them from the link, it strips all of their defensive bonuses, and then you just fucking kill them. And that's what I should have done. I should have just moved up, knocked her out of the link, and killed her in one go with a Charonted. So the play ended up being fine. It took 5 or 6 orders to get this kill with the Charonted and the Spotlight and the Oblivion and the missile launcher, and it would have taken 4 at most to do it with the Charonted. So I cost myself 2 orders being too clever by half. useful lesson to remember. If there is a quick and efficient way to do something, don't faff around looking for missile strikes. There are better ways to accomplish things. Anyway, with that little high horse said, it did kill the it killed the riot girl. It just took a lot of orders, but that was fine. I killed the riot girl. That's piece one that I needed to deal with. Dealt with, and so that left the lizard. Now, I did not have a practical means of engaging the lizard really with the Chirontid. I could have chosen to take that face-to-face roll, but I would have had to endure flash pulse shots while I was going, and I would have had to take the fight at mediocre range. I would have had to. He was out of cover, but I would have been in bad range. So it would have been 3 dice 11s with hit or splash plasma. The plasma splash would have been pretty tasty actually, versus 1 dice 14s back with an explosive round. That's a maybe proposition. It's a serious maybe. The better play, the one that I went with, was to activate the Raicho. Now, the Raicho obviously did not have a lot of orders. It had access to at most 4, but that was enough to activate and move. I took a gunfight, actually activate and moved, took a gunfight with a flash pulse, inconclusive, and it moved up to this position here. Yes, I'm aware that's an avatar. I do not want to paint a whole second silhouette 7 tag. So the avatar is playing duty as the Raicho. Maybe when the tag raid 1 comes out, I will grab that boy. But this is a face-to-face roll with the lizard in the distance there. And I get lucky here, but it is worth noting that that's a lizard out of cover versus a Raicho in cover. This is a spectacularly good face-to-face roll for me to have. I'm 4 dice on 17s, armor piercing, he has no cover, and he's on 1 dice 14s back. Now, as it happens, he whiffs, I hit with all 4 shots, and he dies. That's about a 5% chance to happen, and it's something like a 20 to 25 maybe percent chance to actually knock him unconscious with this face-to-face roll, but it's about a 47% chance to do 2 wounds or 1 wound. Like the face-to-face roll was very, very good, and I have converted 1 irregular order at this point to have this face-to-face roll. There's an unopposed flash pulse that comes at me from downrange here. It actually misses. It's on 7s. It spangs. That's fine. If it had hit, whatever. But I killed the lizard in 1 go, which is, so that's outstanding. I've only killed 2 models this turn, but they are the lizard and the riot girl missile launcher. Both of them being dead is a spectacular result on the first turn. The lizard, so the Raicho has, it takes this face-to-face roll and it moves back in this direction. And the reason why it did that is that I didn't know what the outcome of the face-to-face roll would be. In retrospect, if I had known that the lizard was going to die, it would have been ideal to have the Raicho on an aggressive Overwatch position, but I couldn't guarantee that. And I would have been very happy just doing a couple of wounds and then like casting the lizard's aggressive prospects into significant doubt, etc. Still a very good outcome. So the Raicho has moved back. It won't be in an aggressive Overwatch position. I just use I've converted a irregular order already. Don't want to do that too much more. I want to save those over multiple turns, so the lizard just hangs up where it is, and the Libertos moves up in places are mine. So then there's a few orders left in the first combat group. There's a little bit of action here. This Tiger runs up and it actually successfully discovers this camouflage marker, which is great, but it gets flash pulse for its trouble. So that's the last of the Tiger's activation. And then this Umbra Samaritan, it moves up here to take a face-to-face roll with the flash pulse remote in the distance there. This is purely like, I had the orders, it couldn't die, right? It's non lethal weapon, may as well try it. But unfortunately, he wins, I get stunned, that's cool. In an ideal world, I get a kill here, and then I move around and I eat the 0. It's a 0 with EM mines and deployable repeaters, awesome piece, very cheap. Ideally, I kill the flash pulse remote and then eat the 0. Didn't happen, that's okay. If I had more orders, I could have actually taken this fight in a way where I could have maybe ignored or avoided the flash pulse remote. I've got 6-inch cautious moves. There's a couple of different ways this could go. I could have like snuck up here and then jumped down and eaten the 0. But because I faffed around with the Chirontid, not enough orders to do that. So this is the deployment zone picture again, but my opponent begins his first turn, and he's in some strife. So the lizard that was here is dead, and the riot girl is dead, and I've advanced pieces up the board. The Chirontid has moved into kind of this space. The Raicho has moved up to here. Kiss is dead, but that was the only casualty. So my opponent needs to... Oh, and the Libertos has moved up to here and has like laid a bunch of mines. My opponent, and if we just go back real quick, we will see, yeah, this is where the Libertos ended up. So I had a bunch of orders left, so I just moved up and was annoying to him. Attempted to discover this camouflage marker. Didn't, that's fine. Have a whole bunch of mines. Pin yourself back. So my opponent has to make a play, basically. He's got a small number of offensive pieces that are capable. Disaster strikes on the first one. This Morlock with Climbing Plus runs down there. The Libertos up here dodges from standing to prone, but a Datarazi has Impetuous around to here. And the Datarazi just takes a long-range heavy pistol shot. And it's on 5s. And he hits. And the Morlock fails its smoke. And dies. Fantastic. Great. Nice when that happens. I didn't expect it. I expected that to eventually be a trade between Datarazi and the Morlock, but I did have confidence that Datarazi would stop the Morlock. The main thing is I didn't want the Morlock to be able to come all the way up to here and isolate or kill my Chirontid. If it had happened, not the end of the world. As noted, this list has got many veterans, but I was very happy to have stopped it at the pass. The Morlock around here, where is it, on this corridor, moves up this direction. The Taiga creature sees it and dodges into close combat. And that stops where that is for now. So at this point, my opponent reevaluates, and he thinks about what he's got access to. And he's got the Riot Girl Spitfire, who's still pretty good. Damage 15 on her in particular is very nice. And he's got his camouflage markers. And this one is the one that will end up activating. But first, he's got to clear all of these mines, because he wants to do something with this camouflage marker. And to do that, he activates his Morlock. Now, the Morlock is on ground level here. It climbs up there, and then it moves, and then it dodges. And the second move sets off all of those mines and clears the path like this. Now, he gets targeted by something on the way through, because there's a repeater around there somewhere. Fine, cool, well and good, but he clears these two mines, which leaves this camouflage marker able to declare super jump or climbing plus and go up and over there. The Libertos tries to go after it and slow it down, but obviously that means it's branded Castro. Now I think I succeeded a discover roll. Yep, and here we go. We can see branded Castro as proxy hanging offside of the building. I figure he's going to try and do something with that. He doesn't have a ton of orders left, but Brand is very dangerous melee combatant. So the Libertos attempts to make a dodge and move in this direction. And it gets to there and like trying to chase after Bran, at which point my opponent just activates the Riot Girl and she moves. And she just kills the Libertos in one go. Doesn't even send a dogged. She's burst 4, damage 15. She just chunks him up, which leaves Bran free to continue running around this direction. And this is where he gets to. So he's been spotlit on the way in, and he has closed in here and comes around, and he makes a run into melee with my Chirontid, and he makes it into melee, and he rolls a crit, but on the way through, the Raicho easily rolls a 11 to hit him, because he's Mimetism and bad range, but he's targeted. So the Raicho just cleans him up with an explosive round. On his last order, though, he gets into close combat with the Chirontid, rolls a crit. I don't win the face-to-face roll or tie or anything like that, but I pass one of my 3 saves. So the Chirontid goes into no wounding cap, but does not die, and Bran is dead for his trouble. This is not the end of the game, but for functional purposes, things are pretty bad for my opponent. Bran is dead. The Riot Girl is in a semi-exposed position, and he's just like the Morlocks. Both of the Morlocks, or one of the Morlocks, is down. The first thing that I do is drop a missile on this Morlock's head here and just clean him up. And so that's leaving my opponent very short on offensive pieces. But more importantly, there is a massive points disparity on the board right now. So we'll kind of just like move through the remainder of the last couple of turns. But at this point, what I wanted to happen, which is to just play that like attack aggressively, force the counterattack, punish the counterattack, establish a big attrition lead, like perfect. It's one of the things that this list does really well. It attacks very well, but it's also an amazing hacking faction with a fair bit of like robust ARO presence, so it defends really well as well. It's just combined army leveraging its strengths. So we roll into my second turn. I drop the missile launcher so we can actually see. He's standing prone here, but in one order, I'm gonna drop a missile launcher right on this Morlock's head, and then the Raicho takes that position there and just starts cleaning up Flash Pulse remotes. I think it takes like 4 orders from his combat group. But he kills this Flash Pulse bot, he kills this War Correspondent, and he kills this Flash Pulse bot. And this is kind of the downside of aggressively positioning your flash pulse pieces. They did a good job of holding me back on the first turn, but in the second turn they're just kind of free. They're free money. And so that's 4 more kills in like 5 orders. So that's a really good. Again, that's a good. It's just the attrition is just mounting and mounting and mounting. The bulk of the rest of the turn after this, after the Raicho just sprays down the ramparts, is spent on the Umbra Samaritan. So if we tab back to this position, so again, this is a picture that I took at the beginning of the deployment. But if we remember correctly, the Umbra Samaritan had gotten to this position here before it got flash pulsed by a flash pulse remote. Oh, the Tiger creature also berserked and killed that zero. Surprise, surprise. So the Umbra at this point begins its run, and it comes. What does it do? It cautious moves. So the Riot Girl is standing here with this line of fire, but the Umbra Samaritan can cautious move a really long way. He can cautious move 6 inches, and a 6-inch cautious move gets him all the way over, like not that far, but it's a long way. It gets him out of line of fire of the Riot Girl, at which point he begins moving up and around this direction. My opponent's 1 remaining camouflage marker declines to reveal itself pretty sensibly. And so there are a few things that the Umbra does this turn, but the first one is that it moves 6 inches and makes a whip roll, it fails, and it moves 16 and makes a whip roll, and it succeeds. And it does net undermine, so that's my first classified done. And then it moves around here and touches this signpost, and it fails a whip roll. And then it tries it again, and it fails a whip roll. On 14s. Then it succeeds. And so then it does mapping, because this is completely inside my opponent's deployment zone. And then it moves up to this corner and around, and it gets line of fire to the Riot Girl, and it has her out of cover, and it shoots, and she shoots back, and I'm on 15s, and she's on 13s, and I hit her with a hit mode plasma round and kill her, because plasma is amazing. And then finally, he comes around here. You can see the unconscious Riot Girl that he's plasmid there, and he gets into melee with Avicenna. Actually does not kill her. I cannot roll a crit for love or money. She passes one of her saves. She's actually got bioimmunity, it's not surprising. But he engages her in melee, he wounds her, and he goes into power up. And like, what's she gonna do? What is anyone gonna do at this point? This is all of my opponent's active pieces dead. I've done 2 of my classifieds, and I'm gonna have a whole 3rd turn after this. We can see this, my opponent attempts to rally, but really all he's got is this 0. It sort of moves up this direction. It's going to try and make a run on the Umbra, but doesn't quite get there. The Raicho pins it down, discover rolls succeed. It ends up re-camoing. But there's just not a lot my opponent can do. And this is their 2nd turn. The game has pretty horrifically rolled out, and then here is first order of the next turn. The Umbra kills Avicenna. It's on power up 2. It just moves through the mine, takes the hit, doesn't matter, takes a wound, discovers and kills the recamouflage 0, and that's pretty much the game. Just for showboating, and just because I wanted to get some mileage out of my motorized bounty hunter, I have them run up the flank. Oh, by the way, side note, guess what the motorized bounty hunter rolled for booty? 8 for movement. Fuck. But turns out it's still a totally fine pace. It's a little swarm of angry buggers, and they just 8-inch move. They just run up this flank, and then I think I've got the picture here. Yeah, one of them dismounts. Again, I'm super happy with this as a proxy, and it just chain cults the entire bloody link, basically. And it takes out like half of them. That was not necessary, because the rest of my turn is spent moving the Raicho into his primary quadrant. He doesn't have 70 points left. He's like an inch from retreat. I think he actually ends with literally just his moderator lieutenant alive, and that's the only piece left. So this is sort of like gratuitous, unnecessary violence. We actually, under normal circumstances, would have called the game like a turn and a half ago. But just wanted to play through, 1, get the reps in, but then 2, actually kind of show the full panoply of what this list can do. And it turns out that a flank assault with a motorized bounty hunter is totally within its capabilities as well. So I move in, clean up. My opponent is not quite table, but he's very, very close. I think the last order that he spends of the game is to stand the that moderator up and like shoot the Datarasi and die, and like it's horrific. So end of game, he's got intel combat, doesn't matter. He has no points in his zones. I have only done 2 kills with Predator, so it's not a 2-point classified at this point. My intel comm is not useful, but I've done all 3 of my classifieds. I'm securing all 3 zones, so that ends up being a 9-zip win to combined army. And that's it. That's kind of an idea. That's a battle report, bit of a showcase of how this army plays. It has many different capabilities. I didn't use all of them this game. There are times, so obviously against a Riot Gun missile launcher, you won't get a ton of use out of like aggressive smoke play, but you have white noise. You can always advance up the table. Whip 16 white noise, by the way, plus Fizz 14, plus 3 for range smoke is great quality of life for visibility control. You can kind of always get some control over who can see what and how. Datarazi, you're fantastic. You're very resilient to a loss of lieutenant. You've only got kind of like maybe 4 pieces that are pure order generators, and 2 of them are veterans, and the other 2 are repeaters. So there's very little fat in the list. I could definitely go back to just having an Ikadron rather than the motorized bounty hunter. It's a very fun piece, and it adds a bit more tooth. One of the changes that I made to this list since I showcased it last, I think, is to particularly, and was particularly important, was moving Bit and Kiss into the first combat group. And I'm really glad that I made that change. The original version of this list was actually a highly classified list that had a Nexus Lieutenant, and it had Kernow. And in that version of the list, Kernow was Combat Group 1, Bit was Combat Group 2, because Kernow could participate in coordinated orders with Datarazi and just like spray out pitchers while they were throwing smoke. But in this version of the list, the pitcher coverage is really, really important. You can't afford to have Bit in your second combat group. If Bit and the Riot Show are both in your second combat group and someone strips orders from it on the first turn, you will lose way too much tooth. You will be sort of reduced to sort of playing very cagey and trying to use too much smoke and white noise to advance, and you don't want to do that. So that's a really good change. I think it locks this list in as like it's a class. I'm just really happy with it. It works really well. You can scrimp and cut and make some changes, and you can turn the Chirontid into an anathematic. But I don't think I necessarily like that change. I think the versatility that you get from the Chirontid makes it just really valuable compared to the like mimetism and marker state of the anathematic. Anathematic is a fantastic piece, but the Chirontid at the end of the day is just incredibly well rounded. For like 63 points for that Chirontid, for everything that it does is excellent. And it to include the anathematic, you kind of would have to cut the Umbra, and if you cut the Umbra, you've got 1 fewer like really aggressive hero pieces. You also have fewer things that can do classifieds. So I like the balance of the list where it is. The Umbra Samaritan is a little bit of a vanity pick, but sometimes it just performs really, really well. And it solves for problems that otherwise can be quite difficult to solve for, and it adds 1 more Trinity and 1 more hacking program into like 1 more hacking device into the list. It means that in response to someone moving through your repeater networks, you can Oblivion, Spotlight, Carbonite, all 3 in the same order, and the Chirontid will usually Carbonite because he has +1 damage on his program, so it's damage 14. You can just perform absolutely catastrophic hacking AROs with this list because of the 3 of them being present. And you couldn't do that if the Samaritan was something like, say, Kernow, which would be an obvious but useful downgrade just to free up some points. So yeah, that's the list. Also, as an aside to people who've made it into the video, I am trying a different sound setup this time. Thanks very much to the advice I received in the last video about using OBS's sound filtering properties. Really hoping that they've worked. We've got the Rode microphone on the desk in front of us. So if you have noticed any, now that you're this far deep, if you've noticed any sound quality difference, please let me know. Because if this is a better setup, that's excellent. If it's too loud, if it's too quiet, any feedback on that front, super appreciated. Don't have the next battle report planned at this point, but I have been playing some games testing out Dashat in ITS 13 with the new profiles dropping from Tag Raid, and I am very optimistic about them as a sectoral, having changed over the course of N3 into N4, and then N4 into ITS Season 13. I'm actually really optimistic, so if that's something that's interesting to people, let me know in the comments as well, and I'll see about putting something together, because they're in a really interesting place right now. As always, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time.